I'm Captain Mike, and in this video we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, especially comments that have been made by viewers requesting some information on one topic or another. And that's why I call this video This and That. The first thing we're going to talk about is this do-it-yourself crystal glaze. Actually I made a video on this. It's I think it's 2 videos back. The last video I published was about the Atlanta Fine Arts Craft Show. But anyway, in that video that I think it was called Glazing Saddles or something like that. One of the last things I showed you was this little vase right here. And my question at that time was, could I work it out so that if I put this in a horizontal position, would the glazes run? What would they do? And the whole premise of that was this right here, which is a speckled glaze that I wanted to do myself for a particular project. And these were all fired horizontal, okay? So I put, a couple of different colors of base glaze on this thing and used different sizes of frit. And this is what I've got. You can see that this run right here on the yellow run real good, as it did with the yellow. Some of the others run a little, but not so much. The smaller frit did not run. Now when I talk about frit, I'm talking about glass, crushed up glass. I have a video on how you would do that. So that's coarse, it would have a tendency to run. That's is that medium? This is medium. This is fine. And this is powder. Now to bring this into perspective, get all this put away here. Someone asked me, well, what would happen if you used the powder? Because I never used it. I may even have made some reference to that. The powdered frits have a tendency, for me anyway, to turn out kind of muddy, okay? And so, that's when I'm using them by themselves, and I'm doing glass on glass. So this viewer asked about maybe putting really fine powder into the glaze. I just mixed it in with white glaze. In this case, it stirred it up. This is what we got. It come out just great. So thanks to the comment from that viewer, it just kind of got my interest up, and we've come out with something that I think is going to be useful. So that is all I can say about these. And if you're interested, you can go back and see the other video, and then you'll know what I'm talking about here. The next thing I'm going to talk about is resins, and I have a video on resins too, but I pour a lot of them. I like these little things like this. And I also pour resin, clear resin, over wood and have some real shiny glass-like finish on that. But what I want to point out here in this little this and that video is, say you want to pour this and you don't know exactly how much resin that you need to fill up this mold. What I do is, most of the time, I just go with 8 ounces in a silicone container, and I stir it all up and I pour it in here. And there's always some left over. So here's my little tip. Always have a lot of these little molds ready. If you don't have some, buy some. They're not very expensive. You can get them on eBay if you want to wait for them to be shipped from China for just a few dollars. A little bit more you pay for the shipping on Amazon, but you can get these. Now I have a lot of them because I have a weakness for them. And the great thing is you get all this really swell stuff, this extra. It would just normally be stuff that would be thrown, it would get hard in your jar, and you'd have to scrape it up and throw it away. So I like it, and that's what I do. But you ask yourself, what do you do with all those things? I put them in one of these plastic shoe boxes, and every time a bunch of children come by and they're looking at things or asking about things, I let them go through this and pick this stuff out. So that's what it's good for, okay? It's always good for that. And then you don't waste anything. And that's about all I'm going to say on the resins. This also, I do the same thing with plaster. Whenever I pour plaster into a mold, then I always mix up way too much plaster. So I always have molds ready and waiting for the plaster, the excess plaster. And therefore I have more little things that I can give the young'uns if I want to. The next thing that we're going to talk about is pouring plaster into a plaster mold. And I have been asked this question a couple of times, and I always tell the viewer or the person who comments that it's no-no. If you figured out how to do this, then you let me know. But this was an old mold that I had here. It was some bunny parts, a little bunny of some sort, and I figured that I'd just go ahead and waste it because it wasn't complete. I didn't have all the mold. So I sacrificed it. First, I sprayed this mold with some release, some mold release, because I couldn't fit, that'd be the least I could do. The mold itself was completely dry, 100% dry. And I put it together and I poured wet plaster into it. I like to never got it apart. And I finally broke a few pieces loose, and I may can salvage the mold. I don't know. If I let it sit long enough, rehydrate it, I may can get the rest of these pieces out. But as you can see, it's a no-go. So, do not put plaster in a plaster mold. Now, if somebody who's done it before has done it and they tell you how they did it. But my recommendation is go with another method. Now, this is in response to someone who has been corresponding with me on and off about wanting to find out what plaster would stick to. And of course I have a video on that. But I didn't cover everything. I can't, the possibilities are limitless. This individual wanted a lightweight background. But they wanted their plaster to stick to it where they could, build it up or whatever they want to do so they could sculpt it. And by that I mean, I'm assuming take a knife or sculpting tools and do that little job to it right there, okay? So I decided, well, I told them that I knew two things we may could try. And so here's what we have. We have regular plaster on a piece of styrofoam board. So what we want to know is, will this stick right here? How well does it stick? And to be quite honest, it sticks very, very good. You might could get it off, but it has stuck good. So that's one. Now, this one here, I wasn't sure. This was my next guess, because I put some of this, okay? This is what one would use when one was puttying up sheetrock walls, sheetrock tape, and it's perforated. And so I stapled some there, and I put that on, thinking that if we could get the, that might would hold it better. But it's not going anywhere either. So I'll get back to that individual, and I'll tell them that they can just go ahead. In fact, I may do a video on this, okay? I may very well do a video on this, but I'll get back to tell them that plaster will stick quite well to foam board. While we're on the subject of plaster on plaster, I think I've covered this somewhere before, but I'm not really sure. It'll be quick. Somebody wanted to know again on how to stick two pieces of plaster together, like if you were fixing a mold, a busted mold. I have a video on that. So I took two pieces of regular plaster, 100% dry, and on one of them I used super glue. And you can see there's a little overrun here just because I'm sloppy. You can be neater. Actually, the super glue won't absorb any water or any plaster, but if you had to glue a mold together, that really wouldn't stop it from being a functional mold, and it doesn't come apart. That's super glue. I took this, which was two pieces of this, of regular plaster, and I hydrated it. I dropped it in water until it would take no more. Then I took fresh plaster and I put it between these two, and I clamped it. Just like that. And I let it sit until it was all perfectly dry. Folks, it's there. So don't let anybody tell you you can't put plaster to plaster to fix a mold or to do whatever other job you have in mind for it. So that should cover that. I mentioned resin a while ago, and I use this little cup right here to measure out my resin in, and it's reusable. And of course you always get all of this stuff left over. Some of it's sticking of its own free will. Some of it is stuck because of the sticky stuff that's sometimes not mixed properly in your resin. Some of it just sticks because of static pressure. So I'm going to show you how I cleaned this off after I have pulled all the old resin that I can get off, and there's a lot of little pieces left. I'm going to show you how I clean it. I get me some soap, just some liquid soap, and I put liquid soap around it, and then I take it and I start working it in with my hands. And what this does is, as you scrape it with your fingernail, if you have one, the liquid soap gets underneath the resin and it releases it, and it does not stick back. So you can kind of see, I'm going at this kind of hard and fast to save you time, but I want you to see that this is the method I use. Every time I pour resin in this, I get as much off as I can, and then I come in here with my fingers, and that soap, I don't think a brand makes any difference. And you can see how it's doing. It's just coming right off. Just like that. That's all you have to do. You've got a lot of little floaters around here, and you take it, you wash it. And it's still wet, but you see it took all of it, but just a little bit off, and you scrape it off with your finger. That gets all of that stuff that's stuck on there off, and then you're ready to dry it. Turn it right side up, out again, inside out again, and you're ready to pour. Let's talk a little bit about trying to repair soft fire brick, such as this. Okay, the reason that I'm doing this is I have an L&L kiln that I personally messed up. It's my fault that the upper bricks broke, but they did. You know, they're just like this. It's in a nice horizontal position, and they broke right down through there. So I'm going to try to repair that, because to replace the brick is kind of expensive, and I like to tinker with things. Now, I'm using, to repair this, is crushed up fire brick. See that right there? Crushed up fire brick in a powder form, or a little bit coarser than powder. And I'm using sodium silicate. What is better known is water glass. Now, I got this whole doggone gallon for a little over 20 bucks. Sodium silicate does a lot of things. It seals. It also works as a deflocculant. It will thin out your glazes and your clay. But that's for another story. What we're going to use it is a cement. And I'm going to show you the different properties that I am working on right now. Now, this is what it looks like when it's just poured out. Slightly thick, a little thinner than syrup, but maybe roughly that, but it's clear. And if you leave it alone, if you pour it out thin, it will harden. And I thought I had some here, but obviously I've lost it. But it will thin out, kind of like that. That's just got some stuff in it, but gee, I don't know what I've done with that sodium silicate. But anyway, trust me when I tell you that it'll just dry out and become very hard like glass. And it's impervious to water at that particular point in time, and it has a very high firing temperature. Here is some that I put in my, oh, here it is, excuse me, let me back up just a tad. Well, I can't get it out of there hardly. There's some of it right there. You see, that's just busted all up, and I put it in this glass, and that shows you how clear it is. So anyway, I have some that I put and mixed with some plaster. I'll never get through with the plaster, but I mixed some with plaster because I want to see what it'll do. And we'll get back to this other stuff here in a minute. But this is some that I fired in my kiln. I fired it from my microwave kiln. I fired it for 15 minutes. Now, I do not know how. It's pretty hard. So it did harden up, but it's plaster, and I don't really know whether it's water soluble at this point or not. But I will tell you, you can mix it with plaster, and you can fire it, and it becomes something. It becomes hard. So I'm just telling you this so that you can experiment on your own. Don't be afraid to experiment. And the other thing I did with it, and this is with plaster too, I just changed the content around. It was stuck pretty good. It didn't stick as good as just regular plaster to that, but this is some that has not been fired. It's just plaster and sodium silicate, pretty thick. This was like a paste. Now you can see it breaks pretty easy. It has not been fired. When I fire it, I expect it, and I'll fire this later, I expect it to harden up and get very brittle. This is just how it looks. If you don't pour it out and smear it out, it just looks like crumbly mess. But that is plaster and sodium silicate. Now, while I was fooling with sodium silicate, I said, you know, let's try something in some plaster molds. So I took some sodium silicate, I mixed it with some red art clay, this little powdered red art clay, and I said, is this going to stick in a plaster mold? Or will it be some kind of great new revolutionary product that I have stumbled upon, knowing full well that I'm just reinventing the wheel no matter what I do? So I did. I put this in there and it's dried out, and I can tell you it's not going to come out. And I'll see if I can break this mold and see what happens. Well, can you see how well that's stuck there? That's stuck. So if you pour any kind of clay, powdered clay, into sodium silicate or water glass, it's going to mix and it's going to dry, and you're not going to get it out of your plaster mold. It will come out of a silicone mold. What you have when it comes out, I don't know. I may have to cover that in another video, but it will come out of a silicone mold because nothing sticks to silicone but silicone. So that is that, except this right here was my first attempt to see if I could make a chemical bond with heat and water glass so that I could repair my kiln. So this was 2 pieces of soft brick glass. Listen at me, soft fire brick. And I soaked each surface, inside surface, repeatedly with water glass and let it dry until I had a surface that looked like it would absorb no more. Then I put more water glass between it, clamped it again, let it dry for a couple of days actually, and then I put it in the kiln and fired it up to 1800 degrees just to see if there was any kind of a bond there. Now keep in mind, this brick is very soft, and it will break on its own, but we're going to try to break it. Folks, I think, not 100% sure, but I think that this will hold. So that gives me enough interest in the experiment to try to repair my kiln. So there you go. That's all you need to know about that. So what do we have left other than a mess on my table? Well, excuse me. Let's try this. If you ever wanted to make a mold of something, say in a silicone mold or another plastic mold, and you wanted to make a plaster mold, here's how I would try to do it. Now, I made this old silicone mold a long time ago, and I used it because it's a little stiffer than some of the other ones. And what I would normally do is I put clay in it. I just took modeling clay, regular old modeling clay, and I worked it around in my hands until it got nice and warm. Y'all remember how that works, don't you? You know how you used to make snakes out of them when you was kids? You know, you roll these things out like this until you had yourself a little snake. Well, the more you roll this stuff, the softer it gets to a point. Now, what I would do on this is I would put it in the refrigerator and let it get cold. But we're not going to do that. We're going to see if there's any detail on the back side of this, and then we'll talk about things. All right, so it popped out reasonably well, and you can see I've got my little Aztec thingy here, whatever he is. He don't look too doggone bad. So what I would do then is I would get me a container. Let me get a container. Now I would prefer a container that didn't have an embossing on the bottom, but we're going to play like this is perfectly flat, okay? You take your little clay image, and I'd use a bigger one too, and you put it in there and smush it down where it was flat, then pour plaster on top of it, and that plaster would harden, and then you can take it out, and you'll have, when the plaster comes out, you'll have a mold. This was my first experiment, that little heart, and it worked out pretty good. So I know this is going to work. In fact, I'm going to do that using a pan or something, and get me a little plaster mold of that little guy there, because I kind of like him. I bought the original one at a craft show. It was a reproduction, but I've since made the silicone mold. So anyway, that is what you could do with the clay, and make yourself a plaster mold. Now here's a little something that you all that fool mostly with glass can try. I've done this before, but I never really got anything kept anything in mind about temperatures and all. Usually with a microwave kiln, which is what this is, it's hard to control the temperatures. For instance, most of the time with these molds, these kilns, I go for a full melt, which destroys any detail of anything fancy you do. In this case, it's going to be an arrowhead. Now this is an arrowhead that I napped out. It's flat on one side, perfectly flat. The other side, I just napped. It was 1/8 inch glass, 3mm, so it's kind of hard to get it both sides. I could do it, but it's kind of hard. Besides, I wanted it flat for a reason. I took another piece of 3mm glass, yellow in this case. This is all 90 COE. You don't want to mix COEs on this. But you can have any kind of an object that you want that'll sit on there. It doesn't even have to be perfectly flat on the bottom. But the COE of the glass does have to be the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can tack fire this arrowhead to this piece of yellow glass, and maybe make a pendant, because I know the edges will start, and I could also round off the edges, but we're not going to. And then we're going to take some of this magic stuff right here that sometimes keeps the vit from developing on your glass. Actually, it's a product that just keeps it from doing that, from devitting. We're going to put this on there, and then we're going to fire it, and we're going to come back and we're going to see exactly how many minutes it's going to take to tack fire this without destroying the integrity of the arrowhead. I went ahead and fired this one trying to get a tack fuse, and there's just no way that you can control, or I can control, the temperatures in a microwave kiln. So it went past tack fuse into really a full slump. Not hot enough to start bringing the edges of this up, but it still has the outline of an arrowhead, but it's not what I was after. But I just wanted to show you. Now, this other thing here is where I took some of this, if you remember, this water glass, sodium silicate, and plaster, and you see how easily it breaks. So I went ahead and fired a piece of this, did it in a microwave kiln too, and it actually made it pretty tough. You can break it, but it changed it a good bit. So what good this will do you, I don't know. As I said, I don't know if it's water soluble, probably not, but this is just for your knowledge in case you want to play with plaster and different with different things in it, water, sodium silicate, whatever. And that's that. We only have one thing left and we'll be through with this video, and that is my little Aztec figure. I went ahead and put it in a little bread tray, and put some plaster in it. It's only been drying now for an hour or two. But let's just see if we've got something useful. Okay. We do and we don't. Too much plaster got under this. I didn't have it down enough. But we're going to dig on it just a little bit, just for grins and giggles. And we're going to see what we have here, okay? We'll see if something comes out of it. I'm not being careful at all here, folks. So don't worry about it. I'll conduct one. If this works out halfway at all, I may do a video and I'll be more careful about how I do it. So we're just doing this to finish up the video, okay? Okay, we're down to the clay now, and pretty much down to whatever we're going to have, whatever that is. All right, let's see if I can dig this thing out. Just bear with me. We'll get it. Almost there. If I had let this stuff, say, cool a little, because this plaster actually is still just a little warm, the clay wouldn't have been quite so gummy, and it would have come out in one piece. And as it is, it's coming out pretty good. Let's just go ahead and show you this right here. Let me get a stick. Okay. Okay, I've made a mess, but I think we can go ahead and say that that doesn't look like much, okay? We'll get turned here sideways. It doesn't look like much, but you can see the detail in it. It is a viable option. You can make yourself a little plaster mold using whatever kind of a negative mold you have, then cram clay in it. And be more careful than me, you'll have a neater job, and everything will be fine. So that's it. That's it. I wasted enough of your time, but I hope that some of this is going to be useful for you. If not, make comments or even something else you'd like to see, and we'll get around to making another one of these videos a little later. So I'm Captain Mike. It's my video, and I'm out of here.